and there's a couple artists said they couldn't make it, so we could send them the record. Yeah, that'd be great.
So I'm in the gallery space. If somebody comes in, I'll just probably mute and turn the camera off, but my ears are here. Just so I don't disrupt anything.
Great.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks. It's good to see you
Thanks
again.
for inviting. It's good to see you all again.
Likewise.
Do you have open gallery hours right now on most Sundays?
Yeah,
I need
the
to-
usual standards, the Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
That's a great show too.
need to pop over.
Yeah, thanks for coming on Friday.
Yeah, it was great. Looking forward to more discussions.
Yeah, nice conversation too.
Well, we can give it maybe just like another few minutes and then kind of start the convo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'll mute myself eventually. It echoes. If my chair is going to be.
All right, I think we're ready to get started. I'm Jen. I just wanted to say that the intention for today's convo is to be very relaxed and communal and to not have the hierarchy of the artists that are talking throughout the time being solely taking up this space. So please feel free to ask questions, to talk about the exhibition if you've seen it, or something completely different. We definitely are prepared to talk about our own personal work and the collective as a whole, but also the exhibition and what have you. Also maybe the fact that it's a Sunday afternoon and there's a lot of starting and stopping for each of us 5. So levels of focus and excitement are always changing as, you know, classes start, jobs start. So anyway, just to say that. And we're also going to introduce one another and try something kind of like this, like pop around introduction as a way to also think about collectivity and not letting the artist be the sole responsible person for speaking for themselves. So that being said, I'm Jen and I'm going to introduce Frances Dott. Frances, do you want to do a little wave so people know? Hey, yeah, awesome. Frances Dott's background in traditional craft manifests in his current practice as rigorous experimentation with a wide range of materials, tools, and processes. At the moment, Dott's work includes assemblage, sculpture, collage, printmaking, and installation. He works primarily with objects and images scavenged from curbside free boxes or thrift stores. Dott considers the found materials he works with on a molecular level, in both a literal chemical sense and in the metaphorical or symbolic sense of imagining the past lives of objects. He layers materials and concepts to create a prism, bending familial stories familiar stories and representations into unfamiliar types of light, uncovering hidden connections and relationships. A reflection of his wide range of interests, Dot draws visual and thematic elements from Catholic mythology and iconography, folklore, science fiction, and from their own dreams and nightmares. Uncanny and haunting, his work embodies a tender violence and is a reflection of the artist's own internal and external struggles to survive and find a place in our shared history.
Great. I'm going to be introducing Kelly. And should we go through the introductions, or were we, just going through the introductions? Or were we gonna each talk a little bit about our work? Well, I'm just going to introduce Kelly, and if we do it the other way, I'll like jump in at the end or something. Okay, so for Kelly Wave, Kelly Marshall creates a range of work centered around concepts of maternal exhaustion, invisible labor, and minor feelings in domestic spaces. She makes lists. At night before she goes to sleep, exhaustion, confronting her feelings of guilt, shame, loneliness while examining generational mental illness in these spaces are at the core of her being. Quiet, sometimes calm. She has long been interested in using abstract images and multimedia to investigate gendered and sexualized experiences. She is motivated by a profound anger about the treatment of women in both historical and contemporary social contexts through violence, marginalization, discrimination, and bias. That anger is matched by her awe of how women exist in domestic spaces. Through constant care, sacrifice of oneself, and embodiment of place of refuge. She inhabits this dialect through multiple artistic disciplines. The work provides a window into small moments, partially formed memories, and minor feelings within those existences. Incorporated into each piece she creates are color stories, line work, or exploration of hand making. It investigates the dependence on the labor of motherhood.
Thanks, Frances. I'm going to introduce Todd, which is very exciting. So I have so much respect for Todd and everyone else in this room. Todd Molinari's work assertively wrestles with the big questions, but it always falls short. In their art making, the questions they have always exceed their ability to articulate adequately that would give them some type of comprehensive answer. As a result, their practice and the work that flows therefrom take a myriad of messy and partial forms as he works through overlapping chaotic systems of excess. They're coming to terms with the enormities of the world as manifested in lost threads of thought and open-endedness. The excess is poured into containers of drawing, painting, photography, video, sculpture, ceramics, metalsmithing installation, new media, and performance art, which are the presence of modest poetic gestures. Their focus of work is on the annihilation of nature as it is conceived in both its empirical forms and its psychologics due to the impact of the human. Photography and painting conceives as distillates of the ephemeral material, all while allowing them to fade. As an artist, Molinari feels that he must go as far as he can in being an antenna for receiving transmissions of what needs to be present in our current age.
Thank you, Kelly, for the introduction. And I am introducing Wade. Wade Schuster's oil paintings explore observation, perception, memory, time, and space. His recent work consists of fragments of material experiences gleaned from walks through the city. His large-scale text paintings and small-scale abstractions work in tandem to explore the gap between experience and language. While his work remains phenomenological, it is not inward-looking. Instead, he is seeking connection with the world through time and space. His work often straddles the real world and an imagined world, merging past and present, disrupting our linear expectations of time and experience, while imagining new possibilities. It's an honor to have a show with you, Wade. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. All right, and then I'm going to be introducing Jen, last but not least. So Jen Silva, her artistic praxis is an act of resistance and healing. She collects, arranges, asks, and asks again as a way to make sense of and reimagine the world. Through these gestures, she begins to find or construct connections that are often overlooked. The tracings of these connections manifest through still and moving images, archives, sculpture, installation, and performance, often blurring the boundaries of each. No matter the medium, her goal is to create space for pause, for looking, for questioning, for attention, and for response. Silva works with familiar, domestic, and bodily materials that through recontextualization hold a strangeness that disrupts expected comfort, using found family photos as stand-ins to examine performed proximity, living flowers as surrogates to explore care, or mirrors as a tool of critique. She builds new visual relationships as an attempt for collective healing. Silva's current work and research explore generational trauma, caretaking, and isolation through the gleaning of found archival footage and organic matter. She collects and repositions these materials to form new questions about responsibility and expectations within familial love.
Awesome, thank you. It was fun to hear everyone's verbal statements. I wanted to take a moment for the folks that are joining us to introduce yourself if you would like. Maybe your name, pronoun, and how your day's going.
I can go. My name's Elizabeth Arzani, pronouns she, her. My day's going fairly well. I went to the Portland Flea Market, saw some shows on their last day, and excited to hear more about Joint Compound and your collective. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, thanks, Elizabeth.
Great to see you.
Does anyone else want to introduce themselves? No pressure if not.
I'll go. This is Ignar. I'm an artist and also a part of another collective, the Post-Collapse Ministry of Post-Collapse Art and Culture, and I jokingly call myself the Prime Minister. So I'm here in Portland and I'm looking forward to your presentation and getting to know everyone. I'll make myself.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
Hi, I'll say hi really quickly. I'm Alon. I'm part of the PNCA low res MFA program. And yeah, I just got word of this and thought I would drop in and see what you all are sharing.
Hi, Elon.
Hi.
Nice to have you here.
Hi, I'm Ahuva. Same like Alan and some other here. I'm in the low res program. And I don't know, good to hear you. Good to see you all.
Thanks
Hope
for
you had a
coming.
nice summer. Yeah,
Good to see you.
thanks.
All right, I'm going to read our curatorial statement, and then we're going to start opening things up a little bit more conversation-wise. All right. Our exhibition, which is the first collective exhibition of After Times, is called Joint Compound. It went away. Give me 1 second. Oh no. Let me find where my screen went. Okay, there we go. Joint Compound brings together the works by the current members of the Aftertime Collective: Francis Dott, Kelly Marshall, Todd Molinari, Wade Schuster, and Jen Sova. Aftertime is an organism that contains many parts. We view the collective members as the joint compound that seeps into all aspects of the cultural labor. This material acts as an industrial compound as well as the invisible connective tissue. It is the underlayer that supports the walls, artists, each other, our community, and practices. As collaborators, we value identifying, examining, and dismantling hierarchies as they inevitably arise. Similar to a rhizome, we see Aftertime as an assemblage or grouping of individuals that will continue to grow and change. Just as a rhizome does not have a beginning or an end, Aftertime exists in the middle, connected through multiplicities. Joint Compound explores this connection through alliance, and offering an introduction to ourselves and to you. We come together as artists, each with distinct practices, positionalities, and methods, yet joined together by a collective labor to dissolve boundaries of the whole.
Thank you, Jen, and everybody for reading. Yeah, this is just such a wonderful bunch of people here. I'm going to talk a little bit about why we chose the name Joint Compound for our show, and a little bit about the rhizome imagery. I think it's a mycelium rhizome. That's the image of our show card. So the mycelium rhizome is very, was a really great, I guess, sort of like a visual representation of a non-hierarchical structure that exists in nature. Lots of those exist, but a rhizome is a really good example. And it was funny because we were like, and anybody jump in at any point here, because I'm just kind of, oh, there's the image, cool. Yeah, so anybody please jump in with questions, thoughts, anything like that as I'm talking. So yeah, Jen's showing us the mycelium rhizome image right now. But so we were struggling with, or just having lots of conversations around the idea of the title of Joint Compound, where we're like, well, how does that relate to a rhizome? And sort of this, as an expression, we wanted to express in our group show with our collective, that a really central part of our group practice when we come together, you know, each week. And with artists, you know, who collaborate with us and show in the space, a central aspect of our practice at Aftertime is, you know, just sort of constantly dissolving or examining hierarchies as they arise, because they always seem inevitably to do so. You know, seeing those things and then dissolving them as best we can. You know, it's really that's an experimental practice, always, it feels like, for me anyway. But so the rhizome seemed like a really good expression of the part of a horizontal organization where we are all individuals that are part of a bigger structure. And it's not just about the bigger structure, because the big structure can't exist without the individuals. So by supporting each other, you know, mutual aid, and it's, you know, the definition of mutual aid is supporting each other, you know, developing as individuals, that allows us to better support the health of the whole structure. Which then in turn comes back around. It's a cycle, and helps us to, I know even for myself, the sort of personal growth, artistic growth I'm experiencing and have experienced being part of this collective has just been like amazing. I could have never imagined it.
I'm the newest member of the collective, and it's funny because when we were putting this show together and thinking through what a collective, anti-capitalistic collective exhibition looks and feels like, and like how it can function outside of the expectations, I was like, ooh, rhizomes, we should, and then learning that actually like rhizomes have been like a through line of conversation within the collective already. I think that was an exciting point of connection too. But then I think even the title Joint Compound feels so human compared to a rhizome, but yet it's almost this like, and we use the word connective tissue in the exhibition language. And I think that the connective tissue are the walls that we currently have, but also like the connective tissue of like the varied practices and the varied approaches, and everyone as like, you know, a collective of right now artists, but hopefully, you know, people that work outside of the arts or, you know, tangential to the arts, of those connective tissues too, between personal relationships to other collective members' works or exhibitions, you know, and so it's kind of like that meet in between the walls, which I think is also kind of where we landed with the thinking of joint compound, of like utility versus the like quote natural and like expected, and how do we subvert that too. So we definitely, that came through, I think, in the exhibition a lot, in the way that we even installed the work.
Yeah, maybe I could add that. No, that's right on. I mean, I could add too that part of it too, I think, was the sense of there's no beginning and no ending, you know, because a lot of times we think of we're discrete artists who make discrete artworks, and I mean, that's part of it, but it's kind of like, how does there like a flow? And even when we look at our method of operating, this is a non-hierarchical, rhizomatic compound collective, that the exhibition bespeaks of that, or kind of manifests part of that, or it's one manifestation. But I think it kind of speaks to what we're about, and how maybe we look at our own practices and just engage in art and community and relating, that it's not just about individuality, and actually it's de-emphasizing subjectivity and egocentricity for the sense of having one releasement go into another and kind of more of this flows of energies, of sharings, of relations, of experiences. And that's a different way of doing art and making art and just being. I think, you know, kind of another maybe small way that kind of speaks to that too, that, you know, just beautiful, subtle but powerful image that Francis sourced for the rhizome and the fungal, I don't know what you call, kind of fungal basis of the drawing was someone had asked me about the typeface and the fonts, and even going back to the beginning of Aftertime, Shannon Edwards and myself, and Shannon is a former member of the original member and former member of the collective. We looked at different fonts, and one that we came upon is this font that's also used in kind of our general typefaces called Maragsa. And it's a very recently developed font by a Filipino Chinese American graphic artist who wanted to show both kind of the particularity of the colonial experience and exploitation, but then also kind of go into a decolonial or post-colonial space. And that the font sources the form or shapes of the Tagalog and other indigenous languages of the Philippine Islands, but then also he speaks of the history of the Americanization, Westernization, and not dismissing that, but in a sense, kind of integrating that and kind of moving to another level of awareness. So there's kind of a philosophy behind it, but there's this thing also, the sharing, you know, so this is that the graphic designer wanted to share this, which is, you know, the general audience, universal audience, and kind of raise those questions of race, class, gender, coloniality, imperialism, that's part of who we are, and what makes our world what it is, but then what do we do with it? You know, it's kind of a response. So it's kind of a gesture in that way too, without overstating it. But and it's not, you know, exclusive to what we do, but I think it's just, that was kind of the thought too.
Going back a little bit, just, and I'll be trying to be brief here. With that is the way even that this image that's up right now on Kelly's screen share, the way that we made this is sort of a similar process to what that process we had when we were putting the show together in the space, which was Jen found the original image of, I think from a public domain image of this mushroom rhizome structure. And it's just like, you know, we have a group chat where we share all these images and stuff. And it's like, oh, look at this. What can we do with this? And then I sort of, I worked with the image a little bit to get the, what the you know, the line with the blue, yellow, and red that we see here. And then I passed that off, and then Todd took that, and that goes through, you know, where Todd is sort of like the font master. And that's so cool. A lot of people have asked me about this font, and I didn't know that about who the design of it, which is, that's totally awesome. I'm really glad you shared that. But it's, I think, yeah, we have this, I think, trying to practice together as artists, like these different ways that collaboration can work.
And Jen basically reworked the whole thing and gave some good, just wonderful collaboration. And it was just, I think that's part of this art working method, is just kind of bouncing off each other and bringing it into the home stretch and then playing with it and going back and forth. I just love that back and forth, and very thankful both to you, Francis, and Jen, with that whole process. And it's just very rich learning. It's a real learning experience too. So Even if it may be, you know, kind of later at night and we're kind of thinking, okay, this is done. No, that's not done. No, that's okay. That's good. It's and that's great. And that's what makes it what it is. And I think even like in our installation, having that fluidity. I had a question to ask Kelly, if you could maybe talk a little bit about that fiber art house structure with the ceramics. I think it's just a beautiful piece. I mean, everyone I think has got just incredible pieces there, but I think I'm just intrigued about the inspiration behind that and what's that about?
Sure, thanks, Todd. Just to say quickly that one of the really special things about this collective is the intentionality that everyone has in every single decision that is made. Sometimes things take a little bit longer to get done and that's because of the level of care that everyone puts into what we are doing and how it affects one another. And so it's it's been really incredible to be a part of it. This piece is, let's see if I can scroll through to more pictures. The Yellow Playhouse is an extension of something that I had started working through over the summer, and with the porcelain floor. And what I'm thinking with this is I'm investigating like the micro geographies of the domestic, specifically, play spaces as where we are, even as we are children, that, gender roles are solidified. And also how we seek and construct places of refuge. In childhood, the domestic is the world. And I'm thinking about, like the fragility of the body and also of the mind. And, as we recall these things, from younger years and, like those sort of like temporary memories, the fragile memories that we have. And so that using knit roving, I created using I forget, it's a specific stitch that I used, but it looks like a braid, but it's more than just a braid. It's a hand knit structure that, with the help of everyone on the collective and ladders and fishing line, we hung it, and it was really fun to execute this and get the support. I know Jen had some really great ideas for how to hang it in the space and give it the structure that it needed without really having any structural support, which was really fun. But with the work that I do, like there's a poem from Emily Dickinson that it keeps coming to mind. And just one little line is, "One need not be a chamber to be haunted. One need not be a house. The brain has corridors surpassing material place." That's kind of where I'm at right now and what I'm doing. And why don't I ask?
Say something real quick.
Go ahead.
Kelly, one of my favorite things about this piece is that from looking at it, you might not know how bodily it is, but the fact that you stitched this on your, like with your arms and on your body, and I imagine it like was roped around you and in your lap, and then knowing you have children and it's in your home and it was probably touched by children, and then you put these porcelain pieces on the ground that were handmade and then walked across them with your bare feet. Like, I think that subtlety of not only just, what did you say, micro geographies, which I love, but also that it's very bodily and that you're present, even it's just two materials, and I love it. Sorry, I wanted to geek out for a second.
Thanks, Jen.
That's great. I mean, when you think about it, it's just like, you got this minimalism going on, you got this kind of psychology, but then it's the body is just right there.
Elizabeth I'm sorry, Todd, to interrupt.
No.
Elizabeth, did you have a question? I just saw the hand pop up.
Yes, I do. I don't know if like questions are for the end or.
Go ahead.
I was curious if there was any significance or meaning behind the color yellow for you.
So when I was a child, my grandfather built a yellow playhouse for my sisters and I, and this is in color and structure, kind of a mirror of that house. And it's also my grandfather I had a really strong relationship with him, and he taught me a lot. Like a lot of the foundations of my art practice are in applied art and design. And as the members of the collective know, he was a contractor, and everything that all of his tools and all of his toolboxes he painted them yellow. This is a little darker yellow because it was the roving that I could get, a little more intense, but he had this like signature color of yellow. And that's something that is really present in those memories that I have of childhood, is like my grandfather's signature yellow. And of course, the playhouse that he built was signature grandpa yellow.
Also, we used some of his tools to install this exhibition, which I think is also, talk about like microgeographies and connective tissue.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you.
If it's okay, I'd like to go back to, let's see, there's a good image of it. This piece, Francis, I would love to know how you came to using the hair in this piece. I don't know if everyone can see it. It's such a striking form. I'd love to know, just like, I want all of it. I want to know all about it, and how you created it, your process, and then how you got, like, the hair is just so striking.
Callie. God, the hair. Yeah. Well, to talk briefly about, because I love talking about where something starts and then how, and working with materials and stuff like that. So this is a lawn ornament from a nativity of lot, like where I grew up in upstate New York. You see them at Christmas time, the sort of plastic glow in the dark, they all have light bulbs in them, lawn ornaments. So this was a Mary, and I sanded the paint off, cut it apart with a Dremel. I do a lot of work with sort of smashing, disassembling, hollowing out the like figurines and statues of the Virgin Mary, or images of her. And then after I took this one apart, just kind of with a Dremel, with little saws, with plastic cutters, then I used a heat gun to stretch the plastic out. It just stretches like taffy. It's really weird, while wearing a respirator. Very importantly, I'll say, if you're working with plastic, protect yourself. And the hair, yeah, the paint got sanded off, because I think these are usually like blue, have like a blue outer robe, and has like these weird, kind of airbrushed faces on them and stuff like that. Because it ended up, for people who've seen the work in person, I always get asked, well, what material is this? Because it really does look like wax, like paraffin wax. And the hair came about because I'm very interested in halos, and I haven't worked a lot with them in my work so far. This is kind of the first one, but the hair, it's just something I have laying around in the studio, as you do. And as this piece was coming together, I had it assembled, as you see, but except without the hair halo. And I'm thinking about, it's acrylic hair, I believe. I found it in a bag at Goodwill. I do have a braid of my own hair. It's here at my house now, that I think I would like to use for something at some point. But this is, yeah, it's acrylic hair. It's very long. So it was like quite easy to work with in that it was long. I think it probably sold at some point for, you know, hair extensions or to use in like weaves and hairstyling. So it was kind of ready to go. But when I decided I wanted to work with a halo, you know, I tried a couple different things. You know, I had sort of made these flower crowns, and I was switching stuff out, and the hair, because the waxy texture of the figure of the Mary, you know, the hair had something that was like worked with this really sort of ghostly quality it has, especially it has like a flickering sort of novelty candle light inside of it. There was something about the hair that just made it like gave me a visceral response in the studio. Like I had, you know, it's like when something is sort of like, I hate this, but I like this, like that's kind of when I know something is good, is when it's almost like, yeah, this very particular type of response that I have where I'm like, okay, this is the thing. And because I wanted this piece to be, and I don't know that it does this, but I'm going to keep working in this genre, but I really wanted it to kind of loom. And I think with this, you know, this figure with this human quality, you know, with the hair does make it, I don't know, it's just sort of the strange and unnameable thing. And I have some poppies woven in there as well, poppy seed pods, which that's a whole other, you know, rabbit hole I could go down through, but I'll hold off. Oh, which now that I have the mic, I got a question. If nobody else had anything to, I don't want to interrupt. See anybody. I have questions for all of you, but I have a question for Jen. Because of, I heard this from a few different people looking at your work, the flowers and the stones that are balanced throughout the space. I was wondering this myself, and I heard other people wondering this too, is there's like this precariousness to your work in this show that, and I didn't see your last show in Portland. I didn't see it in person, so I don't know, I just might be missing it, but there's a certain kind of precariousness in this work that seems like a different sort of vulnerability or I'm just curious about, I guess, how did your work with the balancing items kind of change how you're thinking about the subjects you're working with? Or I guess, what was your thinking around that as you were putting this together and you decided to put the flowers on top of the table instead of the floor, and balance these things all around?
Yeah, that's an awesome question, because I feel like a part of my process deals a lot with language and lists of words, and then researching like the root of words and the relationship of different words, and if the intention of these like obsessiveness I have with words, if that comes through in the work, or if that's really just kind of a starting point for me to like almost compartmentalize and get into like something specific. through language. And precarity is definitely something that is always running around in my head. And I think some of my past work when I was working strictly in photography, and manipulating like physical photographs, I felt like I know I used different language, but it was still very much about like the edge of how far can something go without becoming something else, which I feel like is precarious of like and I think that that's what language is to me, is like, Francis and I, you were just having a conversation the other day of like this list that I have where I wrote out all the different words that relate to horror and how they each mean different things, but yet we have like different intentions with each. So anyway, that's a long way to say that like precariousness is definitely in my toolbox and in my language. And when I'm working through, I'm like this newer work that's about family and mental health and motherhood and care, I feel like all of that is precarious in nature anyway, and can easily tip over into something else. But then like layers of care, like when do we pick it back up and it becomes something different? And then that's also precarious. And then like even this sculpture right here, Todd said that when the documentation happened, like he came in and it was on the floor, the little one was on the floor. And I love that, like even sitting alone in a empty space, it had like a life of its own. And the flower sculpture, like I was excited by people bumping into it to then rattle its own, more dirt on the floor, and having this kind of like lack of control, but also this idea of expected stability, I think harkens back to like care, limits, familial relationships, love in general. And these strange rock sculptures I've been doing in my home, and just balancing things on other things and seeing them as like a parent and a child, but also as lovers and as selves, and trying to think through like which rock am I today? Like, am I the bigger rock holding the other rock up, or the other one being held up? So I think that there's precariousness is definitely, and even the book stack. This was like kind of an experimentation, but I now envision like this, like how high can I get without it tipping, or with almost it tipping, or with like someone's body being near it, then relating to it and then affecting it also. Because right now I think it's like 10 books, but what happens if it's more?
It kind of reminds me of like, where you got this knowledge is kind of compressed too, it's this kind of leaking of knowledge or knowledges and discourses, but then holding things together too,
Yeah, the books that I'm working with I'm calling this piece like a research sculpture, because I've been accumulating a small library of like how to parent books, but also how to like garden or landscape. So this idea of like care with the natural, things that can be decorative or can be sustenance, but then also how to care for humans, children, and how that's, a whole industry, but also this like anxiety of knowledge that I think like dying to know how to do the best job of taking care of something, and when does that fall short? And that's even just like a privileged concept of itself, and removes a lot of what's the word, like intuition, which I think also is about this precariousness too, of like you know, it's bound to fall. Those flowers are bound to die. Like it's inevitable because of where they're at and how they're cared for. I have a question about language. In Todd, Francis, and Kelly, I'm pretty sure all three of your statements, and mine in a different language, use the word violence or annihilation. And that's really fascinating to me. And I think that it's in different ways that you're each talking about this. And I'd love to hear more about the language of annihilation and or violence through your practice or work. Any three of you.
It's okay if I go maybe first then. Yeah, for me, it's annihilation is, it's such a huge word. I look at it maybe from just kind of it's more like these pieces of work as a way of wrestling with that whole question of annihilation, language. It's kind of circling around, I think, a number of things. I think one would be this whole idea of making something out of nothing, but yet that in a sense is already kind of a privileged concept and a privileged stance. So then it's then kind of a process that switch over to making something out of something that already exists. And so that language in that sense is a type of annihilation, and language speaks to that. Even practically, like this piece here, it started out as making something out of nothing. It was in one sense going to be a floor piece and kind of a timepiece. And I like that open-endedness of it, where I started working on it. And then you, Jen, you said, is that frame, is that something you want? Is that good? And I like that in the sense is that it was just kind of open-ended, and it wasn't like intended on my part, but it was just like, you're right. It's not jiving. And then it kind of led to the conversation where, why don't we try this up on the wall and see what happens? So there's elements that were brought in, and it was there's kind of a play to it, but then there's also kind of a more of a serious point to it, or maybe it's more reflective, kind of philosophical of what can you do with processes? And it's this control too. So language is about control, but then it's about relating to control, my own type of need or felt need to control, and then release it into something that's else, whether it's like your subjectivity, your input. It's this give and take kind of thing. So to me, I'm just fascinated by that and really engaged in that just as a process of being an artist, of recognizing kind of the privileged position of ideas or subjectivities, and then saying, how can I, in a non-controlling or decontrolled way, distance myself from that, but then allow there's a space for something to happen, whatever that is. And that's the practice, or that's an element of practice. So I think that would be one way I think about language. That's kind of maybe another way. It's kind of like thinking out loud, but thinking out loud is almost kind of cliche, but it's like experimenting by means of speaking and conversation. But then language is just as much as listening and perceiving or apperceiving. So I think it's that would be some initial thoughts.
Todd,
I think I'm sorry.
I love that you're mentioning listening, because the materials that you're using right here are listening materials. Like,
Right.
would you talk a little bit more about what these materials are, right, that we're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, this is both materials really are listening, or actually all the materials are listening, in the sense you have even the pins, the T-pins that hold the works up are, in a sense, there's kind of a receptivity to them. There's attention to them. The graphite paper is meant to be a receptive material. It receives impressions. So it's a kind of a listening. There's kind of a, it's not passivity, but it's a type of medium that makes something else or allows something else to be made. And then like the photographic paper, which again is part of the timepiece, shows this flow. Again, part of the thing about annihilation is this idea of, well, you know, we're coming to this definitive end. There's like these ending, whether it's the end of an era, an end of a process, the end of humanity, whatever it is, but maybe not, you know. And so it shows the passage of time, but then it also shows with that kind of a material that there's kind of well, it is an absorption of light. And even just with the blackness as a color or lack of color, it absorbs light, but then it doesn't just stay there, it changes. There's a process. So that's it. To me, those are kind of maybe metaphors for listening, and it kind of is kind of a language.
That is so cool. Listening materials. As Todd and Jen are talking, I'm thinking, well, that's so interesting. I'm so glad you noticed, Jen, that Todd and Kelly and I that we are like using this language. That's so with Todd and I, it's I can see that because well, Todd and I work collaboratively. We just have sort of like an ongoing collaborative project that's like, oh, there's always something cooking. But our last Todd and I had a show up that was called Apocalypsis in the spring. And we've been working around this idea of apocalypse, with this idea of apocalypse. And sort of the different, kind of like what you were saying about your list of words for horror. Like we're sort of working like that a little bit, but with the word apocalypse and like, what does that mean? What are these different, you know? So I feel like with the way that we're all working with the word violence, it can just mean a lot of different things. For me and my like individual practice, I think violence, it's really, for me, it links back to, well, on a personal level, but then on sort of a larger political level, talking about destroying oppressive structures, like violent, or, you know, institutions. Like I'm committing acts of violence against the things that have hurt me. And in doing so, you know, that's an empowering thing for me. And I think, you know, when we do that as a society, you know, when people do fight back with violence against these institutions that cause harm, I guess it's around, I think about, you know, that. So again, it's sort of the micro, like, or for me, my personal experience, and then, you know, my beliefs and values about, I guess, political belief systems, is that sometimes violence is necessary for growth. And I think maybe, well, Jen and I, we talked a little bit about this the other day. We were talking about, what is this? What is violence? What's the, what does it mean? And then someone along the line started talking about, well, like, what about the violent, like birth, giving birth is violent. You know, so it's not, there's not necessarily like a moral, I think often violence is assigned being morally bad thing, where it's actually maybe more of a neutral thing. And it can really go in either direction. It just depends on who's behind it and why, I guess. But that's how I think about it in my work.
I really appreciate that, Francis. I think a lot about that too, in terms of, just rejecting the traditional structures and in terms of like the value of bodies and labor and just violence, like a violent rejection of, the hegemonic structures that hold us in the places we are in. And, I've talked a little bit about mine, but I also want to tie in, I do believe that Wade, in some of this, I know when you talk about your paintings and the walks you take, I believe just having known your work for the last couple of years, I think there are also some connections with that as well in terms of the landscape and your interactions with it. And I'd love to hear, how you see how your work fits in, because I definitely see a connection too.
Yeah. That's like, generally speaking, I just want to say too that like that's been one of the really cool things about this collective, is that what brought us together isn't really our commonalities artistically. It was more of like philosophical, political, wanting to, do something outside of like your typical art space. And for most of us, we didn't really know each other's work even when we started. And so that's been one of the cool things about doing this show, is that as a new like group, it was a way for us to learn about each other's work. And one of the things that's kind of fascinating and will probably happen in most group shows, but it's maybe not something that is sought after enough, is this amazing like thing where everyone's work somehow has these threads, that connect. And so I have seen that with all of our work too, which has been really exciting. And so just like to make an immediate connection about what we were just talking about with language, I tend to do these smaller abstract paintings, but I also do large text-based paintings, which I didn't put one of those in the show, but in terms of language, I'm either working literally with language, or I consider these paintings to be like in this gap between language and an experience. So it's like kind of like a memory slash word slash image that is kind of like a flash that I'm trying to put up. And so another thing, I was like just taking notes as we were talking while others were talking, and things that in terms of my own work that I related with. Francis, like I'm also very interested in the past lives of objects, or the material, the historic materiality of objects. But as I'm walking, I'm thinking of them in terms of history, collective history, what's standing, and what, as I'm walking through a city or a landscape, what that past brings to the present, in a sense. And then I was also thinking Kelly talked about small moments and partially formed memories, which is exactly what I am thinking about with these smaller paintings. They're like these small little moments that somehow remain in my head after, you know, an experience that are then rewritten in a sense, in a new kind of language. And Todd, I think we share this big ideas, more like working with a philosophical language, which I find really interesting. And Jen, this idea of language, and making connections that are often overlooked. So anyway, I wanted to share that just because I was fascinated, and I you know, sometimes think that we overlook the fact that we're all like making such different work, aesthetically speaking, yet there's so much overlap, like inevitably, for these kind of rich discussions. And I'm sure those of you joining us have probably felt that at some point too, which I think is just pretty cool.
Wade, this green painting that's up right now next to Todd's collage, this painting, and I know it's not one of the paintings where you actually use words and text, but it strikes me so hard as a piece of writing and a painting at once. Was that, when you were making this one, did it feel like writing at all?
It did, actually. And there's actually a moment down here where I thought I had written love, like right down here in the kind of middle,
Oh, yeah.
you know, third. And it was just a kind of a random thing, but I liked that it was there. So I just always see that as love now. But, and then some of these marks that look like, you know, your typical counting marks, but really this is just to like give some like kind of background on like where something like this would come from. Is it's as simple as a vine. It was just like thinking of like a vine that was on a wall, and trying to think back to the super basic structure, or you know, how I would see it in my mind type of thing. So
I read the lines as stitches, like surgical or material, and I thought that the arrangement of them was like so interesting, because I was like, what could those possibly be holding together in that pattern? And like it's almost this like chaotic attempt to hold something together, which then also got me thinking about this collage work of Todd's, also collage in general being assemblages of multiple things to be then held together, and then even joint compound as like a concept that we were working within too. I loved that.
yeah, it was really cool putting this right next to Todd's piece and almost making it a new piece, you know, a collective piece. And I do like that idea of the chaos. And then you have this neat grid to the left, which is interesting.
I got these different systems, and even within the difference of the systems, you got difference, you know, so it's a unity of what unites, but then also what separates or divide, makes it different, you know. So I like it where, like your piece there, where it's like I could see where there's kind of this tension between surface, marks on surface, but then it's also a landscape. Or maybe it's making a space or indicating a type of space, whether it's inner space or outer space. I think it's very interesting. And I like that, how that plays off of that grid work that I did, where it's kind of playing with space, language, surface, and it's undefined, and I think in interesting ways.
It's, well, really quick, I want to mention before I go back to it, just talk a little bit about Wade's painting. Someone mentioned in our group text that we're at 1 hour and 10 minutes. So if anybody needs to take off, that's totally fine. We are, but if you have any questions also or comments before you gotta head out, you can just give a hey in the chat or just, jump in also. Because we are notorious amongst ourselves for having extremely long Zoom meetings that go way longer than they're supposed to.
Time isn't real.
Yeah, what is it anyway? It's after time. We don't have there's no time. It's post time. Abolish clocks, but going back to Wade's paintings, and I love that those, thank you, Elon. What became its own sort of, we sort of ended up with these little pockets of installation throughout this show, throughout Joint Compound, like with this work, this green work of Wade's next to Todd's, like it seemed like it was like a thick vellum with the text and the yellow. I don't know, there was like a cadence, I think, to Wade's paintings that really kind of makes me think of almost like a synesthesia or something like that. There's like these colors have a pace or something like that really, it started almost the way, sort of like light will bounce around a room full of mirrors. It was like this yellow stripe in one of Wade's paintings that I think that didn't end up hanging up in the show was sort of like bouncing off of, this yellow dot from Todd's work that's like bouncing off of Kelly's yellow playhouse, that's bouncing off, the yellow in the books that Jen was using, that's bouncing off of, a hue of, of the Mary light, or, I hung a chain between two prints on the wall with the ladder because, well, it needed some other little thing to become what I wanted it to be, but it was because that it was talking to Kelly's fabric sculpture across the room. So it was like, and like how Wade was saying, we didn't really know one another or each other's works, and in many cases we didn't even really meet in person until very recently. All of us, we've just, it's all just been kind of virtual, but it was just really interesting to see how all these like maybe seemingly disparate types and ways of working can actually come together in something that feels really, it feels like a, like a well-functioning organism. It's like, really.
I agree with that. I also think that the fact that we self-curated this, it was a very much a collaborative endeavor across the board, but also that we weren't just collaborating and putting together a group show. We even pushed against the idea of like, what is a group show and what are the expectations of that spatially and aesthetically? And these like rigid lines so that nothing's overpowering or crossing the line into someone else's work. And we did so even with, there's no titles. There's not even anything other than these small like color-coded push pins to kind of like map you to the artist, intentionally, so that it's not about each, and I mean, going back to the exact language we used in the exhibition statement, that it's not just about the individual, it's about the individual in connection to the space, which even using the ladder, like that's not an installation piece, that's a part of the physical space that provides, function, and then utilizing that with a piece of Francis's and mine, to then communicate this, like, I keep just using connective tissue, but even like the chain that you used, to connect your two pieces so that they weren't individuals anymore, I think like was really exciting to see.
I just had a question for both of you, Jen and Francis, because I noticed that there is an installation type of territory that both of you seem to be entering into, or maybe that's my perception or experience of it, but there's kind of a field of energy or field of interaction. Maybe you could speak to that, because I don't know, I don't have the words for it, but there's this moments that were there that called for, just kind of drew you in for engagement. I don't know, there's something that's kind of a performativity or performance art thing too that's going on, it seems, with your works juxtaposed, not just spatially, but just kind of how it came together. Maybe you could talk about that.
I like the use of energy there. I think that, Francis, when you first showed us in a Zoom meeting these drawings of yours, I felt like that bodily Pisces energy of like, I need to show my work next to that. And then same with the green painting of waves. I was like, okay, I want people to see the green in the plants, and then like the past that in the horizon is this like green, like stitching, almost like language. Yeah, like I feel like not having a set curation, but instead coming into the physical space and working collaboratively to respond to each other's work bodily, I think was a huge part of the entire show. Yeah, exactly, all in 100-degree heat. Yeah, and again, also not really of ever having the time to hold space in real time with each other too, which I felt like was also really energetic with the way it all came together too.
Yeah, I think that little corner, and I'll be brief because I know we're wrapping up since we're over the hour now, but I think that sort of little corner space where I have like a string of my, kind of homemade rosary beads, and then one of Jen's precarious stone pairs. They're on the ladder, but then they're also the ladders in front of these, one of each of both of our pieces. I don't know, it sort of it was like this little pocket of a specific architecture that just, yeah, I can't quite place, I have a feeling for it, but I don't have words for it. Yeah. I'm not quite sure what it is.
When we were putting it together too, I was really excited by the ladder casting a shadow on the work too. So it felt like, again, like it wasn't just like Francis and Jen's work with the ladder, but it was also using the like light in the space and how does that interact, and knowing that Todd's using the light to like interact with their work, like I think is also, and then next to Wade's like very white and light gray painting that is like just pure light to me. Like, oh man, I just felt like the flow of it all felt so outside of how we can talk about it. I like that none of us know. We're like, yeah, that just felt good. It just felt good.
Like I was terrified bringing in this like garish yellow, like soft sculpture monstrosity into it. That's what I was like thinking in my mind. And then like how just amazing was it that then we end up with these bits of yellow. It was like synchronicity, you know, like it just worked. And it told a color story. And yes, we curated it to make it look like that, but it really came together. And it was really hot that day. So it turned out like the way that everything works in conversation is really special.
Well, I think we should wrap it up for now. And you know, if anybody has, I was gonna say closing statements, but I don't think we're in a court hearing. One of the closing statements. Yeah, just thank you so much to everybody who, I know we lost a couple folks, but I'm so glad that people could come in to see our Zoom, and I'm just eternally grateful for Wade and Kelly and Jen and Todd. It's just like total gift to be able to talk with you all and you know, on a regular basis. And yeah, it's just, and thank you. Yep, Marianne, I think is my mom in here? I think so. Yeah, thank you for coming in. And this will be, I think this will be up on our YouTube. If anybody wanted to watch it again, or if you know you needed to, if anybody else who couldn't make it today wanted to check it out.
Thank you, everyone. It's been a good summer.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.